She said it with a smile. Not a nervous smile, not the smile of a woman who felt a little bad about what she was saying. A real, easy, comfortable smile, the kind you save for truths you've made peace with. She leaned across the patio table, wine glass in hand, and she said to her 4 closest friends, "My daughter? Oh, she cleans toilets for a living." And the table laughed, and my mother laughed with them. And not one single person at that table had any idea, not one, that 48 hours later, a black government SUV with tinted windows was going to pull up to that same house, that 2 uniformed officers were going to step out, that they were going to carry something to the front door. Not for my sister, not for my mother, for me, the daughter who cleans toilets. And what they carried, what was folded and sealed inside that official case, was going to make my mother go completely silent for the first time in 32 years. My name is Alara Voss. I'm a Sergeant First Class in the United States Army, and I need you to hear this story from the beginning, because if you only hear the end, you won't understand what it cost, and you won't understand why, when that SUV pulled up, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel relief. I felt something quieter than that, something that had been waiting a very long time to finally be allowed to breathe. So let's go back. Let's go all the way back, because this story doesn't start with a patio and a wine glass. It starts with a little girl at the top of a staircase. I was 7 years old. It was a Friday night in October, and my mother had company, her friends from church, mostly, the ones she saved her good dishes for. I was supposed to be in bed. I wasn't in bed. I was sitting at the top of the stairs in my pajamas, knees pulled to my chest, listening through the banister the way kids do when they know something important is being said downstairs and they are desperate to be included in it from a distance. I could hear the low music my mother always put on when guests came. I could smell the candles she lit for special occasions. And then I heard my name. And I leaned forward, because every child at the core of them is waiting to hear their parent say something good about them. Every single child wants that. It is the most basic wanting there is. And instead, I heard my mother say, in the same warm, easy voice she used for everything, "Oh, Alara is fine. She's just not the sharp one." A small pause, a polite laugh from someone, and then the conversation moved on. Just like that. My mother moved on, and I sat at the top of those stairs for a long time after that, trying to figure out what to do with what I had just heard. I was 7. I didn't have the words for it yet, but I felt it, right in the center of me, the feeling that I had been measured and found to be missing something important, the feeling that my mother had looked at me, really looked, and decided that the kindest thing she could say was, "not the sharp one." I carried that sentence for a long time, longer than I should have, longer than it deserved. I grew up in a small town in central Virginia, the kind of place where your family's reputation is something you wear on your back everywhere you go, and where the worst thing you can be is average, and the second worst thing you can be is disappointing. My mother, Patricia Voss, was a woman who cared enormously about how things looked. She wasn't cruel. I want to be careful about that, because cruelty is simple, and what my mother was something more complicated. She was a woman with a very specific picture in her head of what her family was supposed to be, and my sister, Bree, fit that picture perfectly. Bree was gentle and pretty and made good grades without making a fuss about it. She played piano, she had friends who came from the right families, she wore dresses to church without being asked. She was easy to be proud of, and my mother was proud of her, loudly and constantly and without apology. And then there was me. I was the one who asked too many questions, who argued at dinner, who got grass stains on things, who couldn't sit still during Sunday service no matter how hard I tried. My mother used to say I had too much energy for a girl. She said it like it was a diagnosis, like something in me needed to be corrected before I could be properly presented to the world. By high school, the pattern was set so deep neither of us even noticed it anymore. Bree did something, my mother talked about it. I did something, my mother said, "Ilara is finding her way." That was the phrase, finding her way, like I was a lost expedition that everyone was patiently waiting to hear from, like my life was a long, uncertain detour that would hopefully resolve itself before someone had to explain it to guests. I joined the Army the summer I turned 18. I want to be very clear about why. Not because I had nowhere else to go, not because I had no other options. I joined because something in me, the part of me that had been sitting at the top of the stairs since I was 7, listening, trying to understand, that part knew, absolutely knew, that I needed to be somewhere the rules were different. Somewhere what mattered was what you could do, not who your mother was proud of. Somewhere I could measure myself against something real. I told my mother at dinner on a Tuesday night. My sister was home from college for the week. I waited until the food was on the table, and I said, I enlisted. My mother put her fork down. She looked at me for a long, careful moment, and then she said, well, I suppose that's one option, and she picked her fork back up. That was my send-off. That was the last real conversation we had before I left. 5 words. I suppose that's one option. I drove away from that house 2 weeks later with everything I owned in 2 bags, and I did not cry until I was past the county line. And even then, I'm not sure what I was crying about. I don't think it was sadness exactly. I think it was the particular release that comes when you finally stop waiting for something you've wanted for a long time, and you accept, really accept, that it isn't coming. And if you have ever left somewhere, a house, a relationship, a version of your life that someone else built for you, you know what I mean. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And this channel, The Quiet Kernel, is built for you. Every story here is for the person who left, who kept going, who built something real on the other side of someone else's small opinion of them. If that's you, and I think it might be, or you wouldn't still be here, please subscribe right now. Hit that bell so you never miss what comes next, because we are just getting started, and I promise you, you want to be here for this. Basic training was the first time in my life I felt like myself. I know that sounds like a contradiction. Basic training, the place famous for breaking people down, but here is what nobody tells you about being broken down. When the thing being broken is a version of you that was never yours to begin with, it doesn't hurt. It's a relief. Every morning at 5, every mile in the heat, every moment someone was in my face telling me to push harder, none of it touched me the way a Friday night at the top of the stairs had. Because here, what they wanted from me was exactly what I had always had: energy, stubbornness, the refusal to stop. The thing my mother had spent years trying to sand down was the exact thing the Army needed. And for the first time in 18 years, I was not too much. I was precisely enough. I was built for this, and I knew it, and I worked like someone who knew it. I'm not going to take you through every year of my career in detail, partly because some of it I'm genuinely not permitted to share, and partly because the parts that matter most aren't the specific operations or the specific locations. What matters is the shape of it. What matters is this: I deployed 4 times. I worked in military intelligence for 11 years. I was recruited at 27 for a specialized operations unit, one of fewer than 40 women in the country selected for that program at that time. I earned commendations I couldn't display in public. I received a designation that I'm not going to name here because most people wouldn't believe what it means. I built a career that would have made my mother stop cold, that would have made her set down her wine glass, that would have made her rearrange every easy, comfortable story she had ever told about me. But she didn't know, because I never told her. And here's the part I need you to understand, the part that might surprise you. I wasn't hiding because I was ashamed. I wasn't keeping my career secret as some long, careful plan for revenge. I was keeping it secret because I had made a decision, somewhere in those early years of service, that my mother's opinion of me was not something I was willing to need anymore. I had put it down. I had walked away from it. And to invite her into my career, to call her and say, "Look what I've done, look how wrong you were," would have meant picking that need back up again. And I refused. So I let her believe whatever was easiest. Government work, I told her. Can't really get into it. And when she got frustrated with the vagueness, I said, I know, Mom. I'm sorry. I was not sorry. I was protecting something. I just wasn't sure yet what I was waiting for. It turned out I was waiting for a Saturday morning in October, 11 years into my career, when my cousin Diane called me at 7:42 and said, "Alara, I have to tell you something and you have to promise you won't do anything drastic." Diane is one of my favorite people on this earth. She is warm and loyal and completely incapable of keeping a secret, which I have always found more endearing than frustrating. She told me, in a whispered voice, that my mother had hosted her book club the previous evening, that someone had asked about me, and that my mother had said, with that same easy smile I had been watching for 32 years, "My daughter, she cleans toilets for a living, cleans office buildings at night. It's honest work, I suppose, but..." And then Diane said she heard my mother make a face that communicated everything the sentence left out. And the table had laughed, and my mother had moved on to talk about my sister's new interior design business. And that was that. That was what she had decided I was. A face and a pause and a table that laughed. I was quiet on the phone for a long time. Diane kept asking if I was still there. I was still there. I was doing something I do when information arrives that is too large to process quickly. I was just sitting with it, holding it, letting it settle into its real shape. I thought about what my mother had said. I thought about the comfort with which she had said it, the ease of a woman who has made her peace with something and is just passing the information along. I thought about the fact that she hadn't invented this story overnight. She had been using it, offering it, pressing it into the hands of anyone who asked, like something practical, like something useful. Here, this is my daughter. This explains her. I thought about all of that. And then I thought about everything I had built, everything that existed in files my mother would never have clearance to read, everything I had done and carried and sacrificed over 11 years. And I thought, the record exists. It always has. It just hasn't been in the right room yet. "Diane," I said, "thank you for telling me." "What are you going to do?" she said. "Nothing," I said. "For now, nothing." And I hung up, and I sat on the edge of my bed, the bed in my apartment 2 states away from my mother's house, and I thought about timing, because I had learned in 11 years of intelligence work that timing is everything. Not the moment that feels satisfying, the moment that is true. And the true moment was coming. I just had to wait for it to arrive. It arrived 6 weeks later in the form of a phone call from my commanding officer, Colonel James Whitfield, a man of very few unnecessary words, which I had always deeply respected. He reached out on a secure line and told me that a formal recognition ceremony was being organized, a ceremony to acknowledge a classified operation from 2 years prior. He told me the names that would be in the room, the officials, the officers, the individuals who would be standing at that podium, and he did not need to tell me what those names meant, because I already knew. He asked me if there was anyone I wanted to invite. Family. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about Diane. I thought about my sister Bree, who had, on a few quiet occasions over the years, told me she was proud of me, even when she didn't know what she was proud of. I thought about Marcus, an old friend from my first deployment who had since become a federal contractor and who understood better than most civilians I knew exactly what a ceremony like this represented. And I thought about my mother. I thought about a book club patio and a wine glass and a daughter who cleaned toilets. "Yes, sir," I said. "I'd like to send invitations." Colonel Whitfield said, "I'll have them drawn up." That was the whole conversation. 4 sentences. That is the Colonel Whitfield way. I sent 4 invitations, thick cream envelopes with an embossed official seal, the kind of envelope that makes you stop before you open it, because something in the weight of it tells you that whatever is inside is serious. 1 to Diane, 1 to my sister, 1 to Marcus, and 1 to my mother. I did not call to tell her it was coming. I did not explain. I simply dropped it in the mail and went back to work. And I waited. Diane called 12 minutes after hers arrived, already crying, asking 100 questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. Bree called 20 minutes after that, slow, careful voice saying, "Ilara, this is really official." And then, 4 days before the ceremony, my mother called. She had waited 4 days, which meant she had been looking at that envelope for almost a week. Her voice, when she finally called, had something in it I had never heard before, a kind of careful, tentative quality, like someone testing ice. "Ilara," she said, "I received an envelope." "I know," I said. "What is this?" she said. "An invitation," I said. "To what?" she said. "A ceremony," I said. "What kind of ceremony?" she said. And I said, "The kind where you show up and you sit down and you watch. That's all I need from you, Mom. Can you do that?" A long pause. "Will you explain everything when I get there?" she said. "Everything will be explained when you get there," I said. She said, "All right." And she came. The morning of the ceremony, I was in my dress uniform by 5:45. I have a ritual with it. It takes time, and I give it time. Every ribbon, every pin, every crease pressed sharp and exact. There is an accounting that happens when you put on something that represents everything you have earned. You don't rush through it. You let each piece mean something. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time before I left. Not out of vanity, I want to be clear about that, but out of something closer to recognition. This was me. This had always been me. This was the daughter my mother had been explaining away to her book club for 32 years, and today she was going to be in the same room. I arrived at the base 40 minutes early. The venue was a formal reception hall on the installation. High ceilings, clean floors, American flags flanking the stage at the far end. The other 6 honorees were already there when I arrived, all of us doing that careful thing where you try to look relaxed while something significant is vibrating underneath the surface. We shook hands, we made small comments about the room, we did not discuss what was coming because we didn't need to. We were all just there, together, in a space that already understood what we had done. That understanding, before a single word had been spoken from the podium, was already more than I had ever had in my mother's house. But before I go, I want to stay with you for just a little longer, because there is something I didn't say yet, something I've been carrying through this whole story that I think you deserve to hear. And it's this: the hardest part wasn't the deployments. It wasn't the operations. It wasn't the years of carrying classified weight that I couldn't put down or talk about or share with anyone outside of the people who were carrying it with me. The hardest part, the part that required the most from me, quietly, privately, in the spaces between everything else, was the phone calls home. I know that sounds strange. I know that after everything I've described, the training, the assignments, the work that will live in files for 25 years, a phone call home shouldn't be the hard thing. But here's what I learned about family, about the particular family I came from. The hardest thing in the world is to hold 2 truths at the same time. To know completely and without question who you are and what you have built, and then to pick up the phone and hear a voice that has never known that person, that has never seen her, that is still talking to the version of you that sat at the top of the stairs at 7 years old and heard herself called not the sharp one. Holding those 2 truths at the same time without letting one destroy the other, that took work. That took practice. That took more discipline in some ways than anything I did overseas. I want to tell you about one specific phone call. This was about 5 years into my career. I was stateside for a brief window between assignments, 2 weeks, which felt almost surreal after the pace of the previous months. I called my mother on a Sunday afternoon, which was our standing arrangement at that point. Sunday afternoons, 15 minutes, a kind of maintenance call that kept the connection alive without either of us having to go too deep. She answered on the second ring. We did the usual loop, whether, how she was feeling, how my sister was doing, some small update about the church or the neighborhood, and then she said, "Are you still doing the government work?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Do you think you'll ever do something more, I don't know, visible? Something you could actually talk about?" And I sat with that for a moment. Something more visible. Like what she meant was something I could use, something I could hold up at book club, something that came with a title I could say out loud without having to follow it with an explanation. And I thought about what I was doing, about where I had been, about what I had seen and done and been trusted with. And I said, very quietly, "I think what I'm doing is visible enough to the people who need to see it." And she said, "I just think you could do more with your potential, Alara." And I said, "I know you do, Mom." And we finished the call, and I hung up, and I sat for a long time in a very quiet room, and I did not call her back, and I did not cry, and I did not pick up the old story and put it back on. I just sat there and let her words pass through me like weather, real while they were happening, and then gone. That is the skill. That is the one nobody teaches you and nobody talks about because it sounds too simple to be a skill. The ability to let someone else's story about you pass through you without taking root, without latching, without becoming the voice you hear when you're alone and tired and trying to remember why you started. That ability to hold your own version of yourself so solidly that someone else's version just passes through, that is the whole game. That is everything. And I want you to hear that it is learnable. I was not born with it. I built it, slowly, over years, with a lot of failed attempts and a lot of moments where I picked the old story back up before I remembered to put it down again. But it is buildable. You can build it. And every time you choose your own version of yourself over someone else's, you add another layer to it, another inch of foundation. And after enough years, it gets solid, it gets real. It gets to the point where someone can say something to you that would have wrecked you at 22, and at 33, you just let it pass. Not because you don't feel it, you feel it, but it doesn't find purchase anymore. There's nowhere for it to take hold. I want to tell you about the women I served with, because this story has been largely about my family, and I don't want you to leave thinking that the only significant relationships in my life were the ones that hurt. There were women I met in service who changed what I thought was possible for a person to be. Women who had come from places as complicated as mine, or more so, and who had built themselves into something extraordinary and carried it lightly. Sergeant Major Denise Holt, one of the toughest people I have ever known, not in a loud way, in the quiet, bone-deep way that is actually tougher. She used to say, "Don't perform your strength, just have it." I have turned that sentence over in my mind more times than I can count. Don't perform your strength, just have it. Meaning, you don't need to make sure anyone sees it. You don't need to stage it. You don't need to arrange things so that the right people are in the room when it shows up. Just have it. Let it be the thing you stand on, not the thing you show. And the rest, if it's supposed to be seen, will be seen, on its own schedule, in its own room. I think about Denise every time I think about my mother, because my mother, her whole life, has been performing confidence, performing pride, performing the version of her family that looks best from the outside. And I understand it now that I'm old enough to. I understand where it comes from. I understand the pressure of being a woman in the town she was raised in the generation she was raised in, where what your family looked like was what you were, where your children's successes and failures were your successes and failures. And if you couldn't point to something clear and impressive, you were somehow at fault. I understand that the story she told about me, the one that filed me away, explained me, made me manageable, was also a way of protecting herself, a way of not having to say, "I don't know what my daughter does. I don't understand her life. I can't reach her, and I don't know how." That's a vulnerable thing to say out loud. It's much easier to say she cleans toilets, easier to have an answer, even a wrong one, than to sit with the not knowing. I am not excusing it. I want to be very clear about that. There is no excuse for choosing a convenient story over the truth of your child. There is no excuse for laughing, for repeating it, for letting it become the version of someone that you hand out to company. But I have, in the years since that ceremony, been able to understand it in a way I couldn't at 22, or 28, or even 30. And that understanding, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding, has made me lighter. It has taken something out of me that I was carrying that wasn't mine to carry. Her choices were always hers. Her limitations were always hers. The story she told about me was always only about her, never about me. And the day I really, truly understood that, the day it stopped being a thing I knew in my head and became a thing I felt in my body, was the day I put down the last of it, the last piece of that old weight, and I have not picked it up again since. I want to ask you something, and I want you to take this seriously, because I am asking it seriously. What story has someone told about you that you are still carrying? Not the big, obvious one, not the one you already know you're carrying, the small one, the one that got in early, before you had any defenses, and settled into a corner somewhere and has just been quietly living there ever since. The one that sounds like your own voice when you're tired, not the sharp one, finding her way. She cleans toilets. What is yours? What did someone hand you years ago that you have been holding on to ever since because you were too young or too hurt or too close to it to put down? I am asking because I think a lot of people go their whole lives without ever naming the story they're carrying. They just carry it. They feel its weight without ever identifying its shape. And naming it, really looking at it, saying it out loud, is the first step to putting it down. You don't have to carry it forever. It was never yours to begin with. It was always theirs, and you can put it down. Right now, if you want. You can just put it down. Tell me in the comments. Tell me the story someone handed you, and tell me what you're doing to put it down. Or tell me what you've already put down, and what it felt like when you finally let it go. Because this community, every person watching this right now, is full of people who have carried things that weren't theirs. And we are here to remind each other that we don't have to keep carrying. We are here to hold the door open. We are here for each other. And before you go, one more thing. Because I'm a woman who has worked in intelligence, and I know that endings matter as much as beginnings, and I need this story to end the right way. The right ending is not the ceremony. The right ending is not the moment my mother went quiet. The right ending is the diner. The right ending is two women sitting in a booth by a window with bad coffee and pie they didn't need, and one of them finally saying, "Tell me what you can." The right ending is not triumph. The right ending is an open door. That's all. Just an open door. After 32 years of walls and windows and the wrong side of a staircase banister. Just one door, opened from the inside. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is, in the end, everything. My mother has asked me, since the diner, to tell her more. I tell her what I can. Some things are still sealed. Some things will be sealed long after both of us are gone. But I tell her what I can, and she listens. She actually listens now. Not to fill silences, not to collect material for book club, but the way you listen when you understand that what the other person is saying is more important than what you're about to say next. She is learning how to do that. At 68 years old, she is learning. And I think that is worth something. I think that is worth more, actually, than any other version of this ending I could have imagined when I was 7 years old at the top of those stairs, holding my breath, hoping to hear something good. This is better. This is real. This is two people choosing, finally, to actually know each other, which is the hardest thing, and the most important thing, and the thing I'm most grateful for. More grateful for than the ceremony, more grateful for than the commendation, more grateful for than any room that finally knew my name. That is my story. That is the whole of it. And I genuinely hope, that somewhere inside it you found a piece of yours. If you did, tell me. Drop it in the comments and share this video with someone who needs it today. Because someone does. Someone is watching something right now, wondering if anyone else has ever felt exactly what they are feeling. And you could be the person who says, yes. Here, someone has felt it. Someone built something extraordinary on the other side of it. Go watch this. It's for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spending this time with me and with this story. Thank you for trusting the quiet kernel with something this personal. I don't take that lightly. I never will. Subscribe if you haven't. Bring someone with you who needs this, and I will see you in the very next one. My family was brought in 30 minutes before the ceremony started. I stayed near the front with the other honorees. I didn't go to meet them at the door, but I could see the entrance from where I stood. I watched them come in. Diane first, in a dark blue dress, clutching her program like a lifeline. Marcus behind her, steady and calm as always. My sister Bree in a gray blazer, looking around the room with wide eyes, taking in the flags, the uniforms, the officers standing at attention near every door. And then my mother. Pearl earrings, cream blouse, program already in hand. She walked into the room scanning it the way people scan a place when they're trying to understand what kind of place it is. And I watched her take it in, the formality of it, the precision, the weight of it. I watched something shift in her face, not understanding yet, but the first quiet loosening of certainty, the first hairline crack in the story she had been telling. A young aide led them to the second row. I watched my mother sit. I watched her smooth her blouse. I watched her look at the program, and I could tell the exact moment she found my name because her hand stopped moving. She didn't look up right away. She stayed very still. And then, slowly, she looked up. She scanned the room, and I let her find me. I was 30 feet away in my full dress uniform, every commendation on my chest. I did not wave. I did not smile. I held her eyes for one long moment, and then I looked away, because General Marilyn Coates, 2 stars, 31 years of service, was approaching the podium. The room went completely still. General Coates did not start with pleasantries. She started with facts. She said, "What we are recognizing today cannot be fully described in this room. Some of what these 7 individuals did will not appear in any public record for another 25 years. Some of it may never appear at all. What I can tell you is this. The operation they were part of required a very specific kind of courage, not the courage that arrives in a moment of crisis and then fades, the sustained, deliberate, daily courage of people who carried classified weight for years and never once let it bend them. The room was very quiet. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear, faintly, the sound of my mother's program being folded and unfolded in her hands. General Coates introduced each honoree in alphabetical order. That meant I was last. Boss. I sat with that. 7 people before my name was called. 7 opportunities to feel the room shift with each recognition. 7 opportunities to watch, from the corner of my eye, the expression on my mother's face. I watched it change. Slowly at first, then faster, as the weight of the room accumulated around her. By the time General Coates said, "Sergeant First Class Elara Voss," my mother's hands had stopped moving entirely. I stood. I walked to the podium. The room applauded. Not polite applause, not space-filling applause, but the kind of applause that says something specific, that means something. I heard it land in my chest. General Coates did not read from notes. She spoke from memory, which told me she had prepared specifically. She described my role in the operation as one of the most technically demanding assignments on the team. She used specific language that civilians in the room couldn't parse, but that every officer present understood exactly. She talked about a decision I had made at a particular moment, a decision I hadn't thought about in years because it had felt at the time like the only possible choice. And she described what that decision had meant for the outcome. She used the word critical. She said the words without which. She turned to me and she said, "The designation Sergeant First Class Voss carries is not given to people, it is given to records, and the record speaks for itself." She presented the commendation, she shook my hand, and in that handshake, firm, brief, precise, there was more true recognition than I had received in 32 years of being my mother's daughter. I returned to my seat. The ceremony concluded. The reception began. Low conversation, the careful way people talk after something significant has happened in a room. I accepted congratulations from officers I admired deeply. I spoke briefly with the 6 people I had served alongside, and then I turned and I walked toward my family, because I had known this moment was coming, and I had decided to meet it directly. Diane grabbed me before I could say a word and held on for a long time, mascara fully destroyed, and I let her, because Diane had always believed in me, even when she didn't know what she was believing in. Marcus shook my hand with both of his and said, "Well done, Voss," which from Marcus is the equivalent of a standing ovation. My sister looked at me with red eyes and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I said, "I'm telling you now." And she nodded, and I could see her rearranging something in her understanding of me, making room for this new version of me, and I loved her for it. And then there was my mother. Pearl earrings, cream blouse, program folded into a small rectangle in her hands, folded and refolded so many times during the ceremony that it had become soft at the edges. She was standing slightly apart from the others, the way people stand when something large is happening inside them, and they need a little extra space around it. She looked at me when I approached, and for the first time I could remember, the absolute first time in 32 years, she looked at me without a sentence ready, without a smooth word waiting behind her eyes. Just looking, taking me in, trying to find the place where the picture she had been carrying of me fit inside the room she had just been sitting in. It didn't fit. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. The picture she had been carrying of me had no place in that room. I gave her the moment. I didn't rush it or fill it. I stood in front of her and I let her have the silence. And then she said, quietly, not a book club voice, not a wine glass voice, but the voice of someone who has just learned something enormous and is still trying to understand the shape of it. She said, "Ilara, I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't, Mom." She said, "The things they said about you, the things that general said." Her voice wavered on the word general in a way I had never heard her voice waver before. I said, "Yes." She said, "How long?" I said, 11 years, give or take." Silence again, and then she said, "And I will never forget this. I will carry this sentence for the rest of my life, because it was the truest thing she had said to me since I was a child." She said, "I told my book club you cleaned toilets." Not as an excuse, not as an explanation. She said it the way people say something when they are looking at it clearly for the first time and cannot believe what they are seeing. Like she was reading her own words back to herself from a distance and finally hearing what they sounded like. I said, "I heard." She said, "I said it out loud to people. I laughed about it." I said, "I know." And she looked at me for a long time, and I let her look. I let the full weight of it sit in the room between us without moving to make it lighter, because this exact moment, this exact reckoning was not cruelty. This was not revenge. This was just the truth arriving at the time it was supposed to, and the truth doesn't need to be softened. It just needs to be witnessed. Here is what I want to tell you, and this is the part that matters most. This is the part I need you to stay for if you've made it this far, because everything else in this story was leading here. I did not build my career to prove my mother wrong. I want you to really hear that. I did not spend 11 years in classified operations, did not make the decisions I made, did not push through what I pushed through because I was trying to one day stand in a room and watch her face fall. If that had been my foundation, if I had been building on someone else's opinion of me, even in opposition to it, I would not have lasted. You cannot sustain that kind of work on borrowed fuel. What sustains you, what actually keeps you standing, has to belong to you, has to come from you, has to be something no one gave you and no one can take from you. What I built because I needed to build it, because something in me refused to accept the version of me that had been handed to me at that dinner table, at those stairs, in those polite, comfortable, devastating explanations my mother gave to rooms full of people who never questioned them. My mother's opinion of me was never mine to carry. I carried it for years, but at some point, somewhere in those early years of service, somewhere in the mud and the early mornings, and pushing past what I thought were my limits, I put it down. I put it down and I picked up the real version, the version that had been there the whole time, underneath all that noise, waiting. The version that didn't need to be the pretty one or the sharp one or the one that was easy to explain. The version that was just exactly enough, exactly who I was always going to be if anyone had ever given her room. And here is what I know about that version of you, the real one, the one waiting underneath everything someone else has said about you. She doesn't demand anything. She's patient, but she is building. She is always quietly building something. And one day, if you give her enough room, if you put down the stories someone else handed you long enough to pick up your own, she will show up. She will stand in a room, and the room will know her. The room will have no other choice. 3 days after the ceremony, my mother called. Not to apologize, not to explain. She called and said simply, "Can I take you to lunch? Just us." I said yes. We went to the same diner we used to go to when I was a kid, before everything got heavy. Booth by the window, coffee that was too strong, pie neither of us really needed. And my mother looked at me, not at the story she had been carrying, not at the explanation she kept on the shelf for company, but at me, actually at me, and she said, "Tell me what you can." So I did. I told her what I was permitted to tell, which wasn't everything. Some things aren't mine to share, but it was enough. Enough for her to understand the shape of the life I had built. Enough for the picture she had of me to finally crack open and let the real thing in. We were in that diner for 3 hours. We ordered more coffee. The pie disappeared. And when we left, something between us was different. Not fixed. I want to be honest about that, because pretending things are fixed when they are just rearranged is its own kind of lie. But different. Rearranged. Like a room where the furniture has finally been moved into the position it was always supposed to be in. And now when you walk in, you can actually breathe. My mother stopped telling her book club I clean toilets. Diane confirmed this, and she started saying, carefully, in the new language she was learning, "My daughter works for the government. She can't talk about most of it, but believe me, you'd want her on your side." I will take it. After 32 years, I will absolutely take it. And now I want to talk to you, not about my story, about yours, because I know that most of the people listening to this right now don't have a ceremony coming. Most people's truth doesn't arrive in a room with flags and a 2-star general. Most vindication is quieter than that, more private, more ordinary looking from the outside, but it is no less real, and it is no less earned. And here is what I believe completely. The record still speaks. Your record, the one being written right now, by every choice you make to keep going when someone else told you to stop, by every morning you show up for something you built yourself out of the rubble of someone else's low expectations. The record speaks. It always does. Maybe not in a formal reception hall, maybe in the way your kids grow up knowing they are worth believing in because you broke a cycle. Maybe in the career you built after every person who said you weren't enough. Maybe simply in the fact that you are still here, still listening, still looking for stories that sound like yours. That refusal to be filed away in someone else's comfortable narrative, that is your record. That is the beginning of everything. Don't give it up. Don't let them have it. You are not a story someone else gets to tell. You are the author of this, and your real record is still being written. So I want to hear from you right now in the comments below. Has there been a moment when someone who should have believed in you chose not to, when you were filed away under not the one and everyone moved on? Tell me. Tell me what they said. Tell me what happened after. Tell me where you are now. Because every person in this community, every person watching this video right now is here for exactly that. We are here for the stories that didn't get told right the first time. We are here to tell them again, with all the details they left out, at full volume with no apology. Leave your story in the comments. I read every single one. And share this video. Right now, before you move on, share it with someone who needs it, someone who is sitting at the top of their own stairs right now, listening to someone downstairs tell a comfortable, easy, devastating story about them. Share it with that person, because the truth is coming for them too. It always does. It just needs a little more time and a little more room. If you are not yet subscribed to The Quiet Colonel, please do that right now. Hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. We are here every week with stories exactly like this one. Stories about people who were underestimated, overlooked, written off, and what happened when the truth finally caught up to the story. This is what we do here. This is who we are here for. And I am so deeply glad you found us today. My name is Sergeant First Class Alara Voss. This has been my story. I'll see you in the next one. This is The Quiet Colonel, and we are just getting started. I've been thinking, since I started telling this story, about what it means to be seen. Really seen, not glanced at, not filed away, not summarized and shelved. Actually seen. The way you see something when you stop and give it your full attention and let it be what it is instead of what you expected it to be. I spent a long time being summarized. I spent a long time being the version of me that fit easily into someone else's narrative. And what I know now, on the other side of all of it, is that being seen, truly seen, requires two things. It requires someone willing to look, and it requires you being willing to be there when they do. To not hide, to not pre-explain yourself, to not get so good at being invisible that even when someone finally looks, there's nothing there to find. I almost became invisible. I want to tell you that, because I think it would be dishonest of me to tell you this whole story and make it sound like I always had it together. I didn't. There were years. Early years, before I had built anything solid inside myself, when the easiest thing seemed like disappearing. Not dramatically, just quietly becoming smaller, making myself easier to miss. Because if you are already very small, it doesn't hurt as much when someone looks past you. If you've pre-flinched, you can't be caught off guard. I was very good at pre-flinching for a long time. At my mother's holiday dinners, I had a script, a way of staying just pleasant enough and just vague enough that I never had to be there, really there, in a way that could be commented on or compared or found lacking. I was present in body and absent in the way that counted. It was a kind of protection, and it worked in the narrow way that protection always works. It kept me from getting hurt, and it also kept me from being known. Service broke that habit, not quickly, not gently, but completely. When you are in a unit that depends on your presence, your actual, full, real presence, you cannot afford to pre-flinch. You cannot afford to be partly there. The work demands everything, and everything you have is exactly what the work gets. And what happened, slowly, over those first years, was that I learned what it felt like to be entirely present and entirely myself in the same moment. And once you know what that feels like, once you have lived in your full self, even briefly, even in hard circumstances, the small version becomes unbearable. You cannot go back to the staircase. You cannot go back to the pre-flinch. You have tasted what it is to take up your full space in the world, and the smaller versions of yourself become like rooms you have outgrown. You can visit them, you can remember them, but you cannot live there anymore. That is what I want for you. Not a ceremony, not a general saying your name, not a specific moment of vindication in a specific room. I want you to know what it feels like to take up your full space, to be entirely yourself in a room and not apologize for it and not pre-explain it and not make yourself smaller so that someone else's picture of you still fits.
I want you to live in your actual size. I want that for you more than I want almost anything, because I know what it cost me to find it, and I know what it would have been worth to find it sooner. If this story has done anything, if any of these words have landed anywhere useful inside you, I hope it is there. I hope it is that place, the place that decides how much space you are allowed to take up. I hope something in this story has made that space a little wider, a little more yours, a little more non-negotiable.
The black SUV that pulled up to my mother's house 2 days after her book club meeting, I should tell you what was in it, exactly. Not the commendation, though that was there. What the officers were carrying in an official case with a seal on it and my name on the paperwork was a flag. A folded flag that had flown over the installation the morning of the operation being recognized. Standard procedure for certain levels of formal recognition, a physical object, something you can hold, something that represents the official acknowledgement in a form that exists in the world. The officers who delivered it rang the doorbell at my mother's house because I had requested that she receive it directly before the ceremony so she would know something was coming, so she would have time to hold it before she understood it. My mother opened the door. One of the officers handed her the case. The other gave her a card with the ceremony details. They told her it was from her daughter, and then they left. And my mother stood in her doorway with a government-sealed case in her hands with my name on the paperwork, and she went back inside and she sat down, and this is what she told me in the diner 3 days after the ceremony when she finally told me her side of it. She said she sat with it for 4 hours before she opened it. 4 hours, just sitting with it in her lap, trying to prepare herself for what was inside. And when she finally opened it and saw the flag, folded into its perfect triangle, contained in its case, official and formal and real, she said she understood for the first time, not in her head but in her body, that she did not know who her daughter was, that she had been explaining a person she had never really met. And she said she sat there for a long time after that and did not pick up her phone to call anyone. She just sat. And I think that sitting, those quiet hours before she reached for her phone, was the most honest she had been with herself about me in 32 years. And that, somehow, matters to me. That matters more than the laugh. That matters more than the book club and the story she kept on the shelf and the years of polite, careful, comfortable distance. That quiet sitting, that private accounting she did with herself, with no audience, with no one to perform for, that is the thing I hold on to when I think about my mother. That is the thing that makes the diner possible. That is the thing that makes the open door real. We are still finding our way, she and I, two women who spent 32 years talking past each other, learning a new language 1 word at a time. It is slow. It is imperfect. It has setbacks, moments when old habits surface, when she says something that lands wrong, when I feel the old instinct to get small and pre-flinch and just wait for the conversation to end. But we come back, we try again. We sit in diners and we order coffee and we say, "Tell me what you can." And that, right there, is the whole thing. Tell me what you can. I will hear it. I am listening now. Whatever you can give me, I will take. And that is what love looks like, I think, when you're building it from scratch at 68 and 33, when you're learning it for the first time instead of inheriting it. It looks like 2 people in a window booth deciding out loud to try, to actually try, to show up and try again even when it's awkward and incomplete and nothing like what it should have been from the beginning. That is enough. That has to be enough. And somehow, remarkably, it is. My name is Sergeant First Class Ilara Voss. I serve, and I have always served, in the space between what people think is possible and what actually gets done. This has been my story. All of it, or as much as I'm ever allowed to tell.
The quiet kernel is where stories like this live, where people who were counted out, written off, shelved under a comfortable explanation come to be heard correctly, come to be told in full, come to take up their full space, finally, with no apology and no pre-flinch, just the plain, stubborn, extraordinary truth of who they actually are. That is what we do here, and we do it every week. Subscribe if you haven't. Share if this meant something to you, and I will see you in the next story. This is The Quiet Kernel. Thank you for being here.